Welcome everybody to a new Rebalance talk. Today with Judy Wajcman. Judy Wajcman is professor of sociology at the London School of Economics and Political Science, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know. She's visiting professor at the Oxford Internet Institute. She has a long career on the study of social issues in relation to time and technology. We are mostly interested on her latest two books, Pressed for Time, The Acceleration of Life in Digital Capitalism, as well as in the Sociology of Speed, Digital, Organizational, and Social Temporalities. So good afternoon, Judith.
Hello.
Thanks for being with
I'm
us.
delighted to be here. And I'm delighted that some of my work is translated into Spanish. It's great.
Yeah, well, our audience is international, so we try to read and write in English the best we can. But I appreciate if you can speak slowly to us, because most of us, we are European, we speak Euro English.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then let me begin by asking you about your ideas because of the pandemic. If this year we stopped moving, and we have experienced time differently and proximity differently. Have this time provided you new experiences, new observations to better illustrate or question your views? How much did you learn from this period?
I mean, I must say lots of people have asked me whether, because the book is about acceleration and the speeding up of life, whether I would have written a very different book now than I wrote then. And I have to say sort of a couple of things. One thing is that one of the main themes I was trying to get across in that book was the over focus on technology as the cause of speed, and not enough discussion about how we live in a culture of optimizing time, of efficiency, of, a good value is to be active, to be efficient, to make the most of time. So that I wanted to very much stress the sort of culture of speed and not just digital technologies. But the other main theme of the book, which it is true, kind of emphasize even more now than I did then, is how much temporality and the subjective experience of time is experienced so differently by different groups of people. And one of the things the pandemic has just made so starkly clear is inequality. The inequalities just, that were there before have just really come to the fore. And what I mean is that, for example, a lot of the writing, in newspapers like The Guardian and, the general writing of what I call kind of knowledge workers, people like me, is there's been a lot of discussion about how much time we've got, and that we're at home and we're baking bread and having more control over our time. And I immediately say, actually, you're in a very different position if you're a mother or father with 3 children at home at different ages, trying to homeschool them and work. I don't know how people have managed actually to do this. This is kind of beyond my ability to imagine how to do this. Thank goodness my son is grown up. And also, we, people like me, are sitting at home while food is being delivered, packages are being delivered, Uber workers, Amazon workers. There's a kind of whole army of people for whom time doesn't feel abundant, for whom actually there's been an incredible intensification of work. And interestingly, one of the ways in which that intensification has been facilitated is precisely by digital technologies. So the sort of platform economy or gig economy, there's a lot of different terms for it. Those workers actually who are, let's take the food deliveries, right? That they're answering apps and rushing around answering apps. All of that is facilitated by platforms that enable that work to occur. And actually, just by coincidence, yesterday I chaired a panel at the International Information and Communication Association conference, and it was all about platform work. And one of the women was talking about a platform where people hire, that was Americans actually, domestic workers, people come to help look after their children and cleaning. And apparently it's shot off the roof, right? The demand for this work has just been phenomenal. So there's this whole other economy that's going on where people are kind of rushing and intensified and have very little control over their time, which is much less discussed and talked about, I think, in the currency about, this time that's been freed up by our control of time. And if I can just go on for a moment, I mean, I was quite struck that you kind of mentioned in your questions, and forgive me, I'm going to jump ahead, right? But you talked about a concept of mobility justice. Some scholars talking about how it's the elite who can be mobile. The whole business about who's moving and who's stuck. We travel and migrants can't move. And I think very similarly about, if you like, time justice. I don't use that term, but I actually think that, and I've been reading some political philosophers talk about this in terms of a concept called discretionary time. And what they mean is time sovereignty or control over time. And that people have got a right as citizens to have some leisure, to have some time that they have control over. And if you like, the exact opposite of that is relying on a platform for your work. Because one of the things that comes across from all of that platform work is that people are endlessly looking for work. And so they're on the platforms all the time, and they have very little control over their own schedule. They have very little temporal sovereignty. So I'm very much concerned about ways in which we can take back control over our time as kind of a human right, if you like.
Mm-hmm. I see. So in the book you talk a lot about acceleration, which is quite evident, especially in relation to technology, which is another of your favorite subjects.
Yeah,
I may say. But I would like to talk about the book by Byung-Chul Han, The Zen of Time, because the Korean philosopher praises slowness as necessary in order to rebalance our lives. But more than in favor of slowness, he claims in favor of rhythm. So his vision of a good life includes moments of contemplation, so being slow, thinking, but as well moments of action and excitement, of being fast. So do you think that the problem of our accelerated lives is no longer the acceleration of many things as such, but loss of rhythm, loss of control? You were saying just now.
I mean, I'm not sure that I'm sort of sympathetic to how that poses the problem, right? And one of the reasons is because, a lot of the discussion about the slow movement and contemplation is very individualistic. It very much fits with a whole lot of apps as well, meditation apps, feel-good apps, take control of your time to kind of feel better, do your meditation in 5 minutes, do yoga. And, it seems to me that a much better way of thinking about it is in terms of caring time, right? It's in terms of collectively caring for other people. So that, and if I may say so, and I hope you don't mind me saying so, a lot of kind of male social theorists, we can put in there Bauman and a whole, a whole lot of intellectuals, yeah? I mean, very much kind of ignore the practical realities of everyday life, right? That there's a lot of kind of care work, domestic work, lots of things that need to be done for other people. People have to take responsibility for other people and care for other people. And the posing of contemplation seems to me a very male philosophical way of thinking about this, rather than thinking about the time of care. And, I've gone to a few conferences recently in Silicon Valley about, do we want to have robots in caring homes for older people? Do we want to automate lots of aspects of care? And I very firmly think that it's a very good case where there's lots of things that robots can do for us, physical things, and reminding us to take medicines and all sorts of things. But actually, there's the time of caring, there's kind of being with people, that robots can't do, that we don't want them to do, that can't be automated, that I think should be left outside of the sphere of technology. You know, that it is one of the big discussions now. You know, what sort of tasks do we want to apply technology to, and what kind of tasks do we think are inappropriate for technology? I mean, can I just give you sort of one example? Please. You know, I'm at this. It was literally the conference called Coding for Care at Stanford, yeah? And these guys turn up. I mean, always at these conferences, you know, guys turn up with their latest apps. You know, that's how these conferences are, right? So they've got this amazing app. You know, they're all startups, right? And they've got this amazing app where literally, you know, they can be, you know, sitting in their big corporation and they can watch their mothers. You know, they've got a whole digital surveillance system in their mothers' homes, right? And they can sit at work and watch every movement their mother's making, their old mother, you know, their old mother is making, and that will make them feel better because they can see that she's safe. And, you know, I mean, there's a sort of mentality, I think, in Silicon Valley, which is that social problems have got technical solutions, right? I mean, you know, I can tell you that everybody at this conference was just horrified at the thought, you know, that our old age would be one of complete surveillance, but, you know, it's like completely intrusion of privacy. And, you know, it wasn't a kind of discussion about, well, how do we as a society want to organize care, right? Do we want to split old people off into separate living spaces geographically, into separate homes, or would we rather integrate different ages of people, have a city that was, you know, much more integrated rather than ghettoized in terms of these things? You know, that there, you know, then there aren't pure technical solutions to these kind of problems. Whereas these tech people often think, well, the solution to their time, they don't have to visit their mother much because they can just video in, watch what she's doing, and, you know, and get on with their work, you know. So it's just a sort of crass example, but I think of that divide.
Yeah, let me go back
yeah.
to Zalman Bauman.
Yeah.
His idea of punctuated life. I mean, that we live kind of punctuated life. We move from one moment to another moment. We run from one thing to the other thing. Maybe one thing is to relate to a lot of people that maybe we don't see these people anymore. So at the end, causes and consequences are not so obvious for us. So we have problems to tell a story about ourselves, to us and to other people. So we move from one weekend to another weekend, and maybe we don't have the feeling of the seasons. So the evolution, the continuous evolution of life is, for us, it's difficult to create kind of a story of our life, as it was easier for our grandmothers or grandfathers. What do you think about his views?
I've got a lot to say about this, actually. I mean, I think that there's a lot of nostalgia about how life was when there was less social change, that we are living in a period of dramatic social change. And I don't think about this primarily as technological change. I mean, for me, actually, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement have been phenomenal social changes. You know, I would compare them to technological changes, right? And they make a lot of people feel very insecure and very unhappy. And it's completely kind of questioning a lot of our lives in terms of, you know, British colonialism and what wealth is built on. You know, we're having to rethink our histories, rethink our gender relations. This stuff is kind of very, very difficult. And I'm not happy with a kind of nostalgia that harks back to a previous period of more stability. I mean, what we do need in this period, and it is one of a lot of change, is of course to have a social security net, is to have decent welfare, social security, so that, you know, amongst this change, you know, we don't feel precarious and insecure, and, you know, and I mean, it's because of those things, I think there's a lot of terrible nationalism and right-wing movements. And, you know, we know this, we're in a, you know, a very sort of difficult period. But I think we have to go forward, not backwards. You know, I don't think we can reconstruct the kind of social relations you know, that made for that stability, that were kind of racialized and patriarchal. I mean, that is what that stability was based on, you know, a particular kind of conception of the world. So, you know, and I think a lot of older thinkers are rather unhappy about these changes, actually, you know, and I'm not, but I can see that without the sort of security, it breeds terrible, you know, right-wing politics.
I see. In our last talk, Andreas Nee, he was kind of optimistic in terms of technology progress. So he thought that we have not to be afraid of machines taking control of many things, because machines are different from human beings. Let's say it's gonna
Yeah.
be kind of we are different creatures than machines. But are you so optimistic? Because there is also a line of thought from Heidegger, from Ellul, Jacques Ellul, from Ivan Illich, that tends to believe that technology moves by itself. Silicon Valley is, you know, full of engineers. All of them are male. There are not much girls there, and this is and this is moving very fast in a way that I mean, it's not clear that governments or people wishes can control. I mean, maybe people wishes, yes, but not maybe people thoughts. So technology is moving by itself, and we cannot stop the evolution of technology. I mean, you have been analyzing the beginning of the telephone, the telegraph, and now to the mobile phones. It seems that there is a evolution of technology which cannot be stopped, that moves according to their own the laws of technology, which are not the same that the politics.
Yes, I mean, I don't really agree with that. I mean, one of the main arguments in all of my work has been to critique technological determinism, the idea that somehow there's an internal logic to technology, so that technology has its own autonomous agency that moves one way or another. And so I always say that I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. What I'm always trying to stress is how much social relations are embedded in technology, why it's very important to open up technology, to have, you know, the engineers and programmers and makers of technology as much more diverse and representative of the population at large. And I mean, this isn't the case just with this new algorithmic artificial intelligence. I mean, it's the case with bridges or seatbelts, right? I mean, there's been this great feminist work recently about how the testing of seatbelts was done on the male body, and it actually meant that women had more injuries, that pregnant women in particular didn't have good seatbelts. You know, people do design things, and I don't blame them, right? You design things according to your experience, right? So if you're not disabled, you don't immediately look at stairs and think it's a technical, you know, you don't think it's a problem, right? So that I've always advocated that if we had a broader range of people designing technologies, there'd be different sets of priorities, different experiences feeding into that technology. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm a very big advocate of citizens' participation in making decisions about technology, whether it's genetically designed tomatoes, whether it's various, you know, polluting things, whether it's in vitro fertilization. I mean, you know, it seems to me, and particularly in Europe, there have been very good examples of governments setting up, you know, citizens' juries or whatever you call them, so that people can actually discuss whether they want various technological developments to go forward or not. And that puts the responsibility on sort of governments and citizens, but also on scientists to explain the science. And in a way, it's been quite interesting during this COVID pandemic to see the way science has come to the fore, right? And can I just say something about that? Because this has been so striking to me, right? I mean, I've been teaching science and technology studies now for 40 years, yeah? But it's never been easier than now, right? Everyone wants to know about this now. It used to be slightly esoteric. Now it's the main thing, because actually the government in Britain gets up and they say during the whole pandemic, we're following the science, right? And, you know, Boris Johnson stands there with a scientist on either side and makes out that science is objective and value-free, and he's just following the science, right? And it's been very clear during the year that every decision has been a political and economic decision. You know, it's been absolutely clear that there is no consensus among scientists. There's no one truth of science, that science is social, it's a matter of consensus, right? But that also political, economic, cultural decisions weigh in the whole time. And, you know, and in lots of ways, if I could just say so, right? On the one hand, there's the whole business about, you know, who's funding the making of the vaccines, right? Why is it that AstraZeneca doesn't cost much money and Pfizer does cost a lot of money? Yeah, everybody thinks about now, what's the relationship between government investment in science, private investment in science, who should make the profits of the science? You know, that there's a whole political economy involved in vaccines, that they don't just come out of anywhere. You immediately think as well, how come they can suddenly make these things so quickly when there's a lot of other medical and problems that never get attention, you know? I mean, at the moment, there's a discussion, I mean, this is just today, but, you know, if I could just say this, there's a discussion about AstraZeneca causing blood clots in young women, right? Young women are tweeting saying that the blood clots that women get taking contraceptive pill, right, is so much higher than with the AstraZeneca. But nobody cares about the contraceptive pill that millions of women are taking, right? It's just become an issue now with this, you know, that it's so differential, what are seen as risks, what are seen as problems. And, you know, the other side of it is that what's been incredibly clear and coming out more and more is how much the experience of the pandemic has been so differentiated by poverty, by race, by ethnicity, that, you know, I know Britain much better than anywhere else, but I mean, absolutely the deaths and amongst, you know, Black and ethnic bus drivers and security guards, you know, that there's particular kinds of work where the rate has been much, much higher than, for example, amongst, you know, academics or bankers, or, you know, that it's absolutely been experienced differently. And even the business about old people, and I know this is one of the questions that you had for me. I mean, you know, in Britain, certainly the highest rate of death of old people has been elder people in care homes. And then we have to ask, well, why are they concentrated in care homes? Did we ever think that that was the optimal way to look after people? What are the conditions like in care homes? It turned out that a lot of the care workers were migrant workers who were casual, temporary, so were coming in and out, you know, that science is from its beginning and end fundamentally social and political. And that's been what I've been trying to argue for my whole academic life. And it seems to me that there's much more recognition of that now.
Mm-hmm. But is also the solution, I mean, the solution of pandemics is around vaccines, which are being created by global corporations, which are competing among themselves, with subsidies from the public, from the governments, with the regulations that, as you say, induce one company to be more competitive than the other. But at the end, is kind of laboratories, scientists, which are developing the vaccines. It's not a change on social behavior. It's not that we relate to each other differently. It's not that we remain at home voluntary. Is that we want to do whatever we did before. We want to keep going on with our lives, and technology and science is the ideal solution for us. So it's kind of negative outcome. It's a kind of reinforcing this kind of pessimistic conclusion from my side.
Well, except actually that what's also very clear is that because of the history of medicine and because of the history of various different groups' relationship to science and medicine, what we're seeing is a real reluctance amongst groups of people to take the vaccine, right? And that's to do with a history of, I mean, my colleague Alondra Nelson, who's just been appointed kind of in the Biden administration, has spent all her life working on sort of race and medicine. You know, it is no accident that there's a lot of reticence amongst the Black and ethnic community when it comes to taking the vaccine, right? So, I mean, I think we experience science and the health system very differently. I mean, you know, some colleagues of mine who are retired doctors have been going out trying to give vaccines to illegal migrants because they're too scared to come forward for, you know, like these things are very differentially experienced, I think. I don't think it's kind of straightforwardly seen as that. And I also think the other side is that, you know, we all know that the kind of globalization we've been living and the international travel has all meant that you know, that this is now a global problem in a way. You know, there is no escape. You know, we're all now subject to this. However, you know, I was going to say however rich or poor, except actually if you're rich, you've got much more, you know, the rich, you know, as you know, in London and New York have gone out to live in their country houses. You know, I live in the center of London in a block of apartments. Many people are not here. They've gone to their country houses. I don't have a country house, you know. And so, you know, that's such a difference in terms of how people have lived the last year, actually.
Yeah, and let's apply these explanations, this thinking on how we overcome climate change emergency, because it seems that maybe it's not so different. Because first we want to get rid of the pandemics as fast as possible. So it's not about slowing down. It's about acceleration, the process of developing the vaccines and getting all of us, most of us, with the vaccines. And it seems that climate emergency, the word emergency, is also pressing us. Again, the title of your book is pressing us to do something as soon as possible. And of course, this something as soon as possible have to be technologically, because our behavior takes time, maybe one generation to change, our wishes are the same. So if we have to solve the climate change problem, we need more technology, no less technology, it seems. On the other hand, it's kind of scientific truth. So the climate change, if we believe, we have to believe in climate change. If somebody has some hesitates or has some doubts about, has a bad moment in most places. So what do you think about?
Well, I'm always a both and, right? I absolutely want to use as much technology as we can to help with, you know, solar energy and wind energy. Of course, I'm completely enthusiastic about these things. But, you know, again, I was very sort of, you know, struck when I was in Silicon Valley, how much discussion there was of an electric car as opposed to public transport, right? And so, I mean, all of these things raise the issue about, you know, is transport something to think about as in an individual way or as a collective way, right? Actually, the less polluting thing, rather than even all of us having a wonderful Tesla car, which, you know, they were all driving around these huge, expensive electronic cars, yeah, with their batteries, would be to use public transport, because the most efficient thing is public transport. So, I mean, there's technology applies to both things, but underlying it are very different assumptions about how we should travel, how we should live, how cities should be designed. You know, should we invest in more freeways or should we invest in more public transport? You know, and I mean, I'm sure you know much more about this than me, because I don't work on transport or these issues, but I do worry that there's so much discussion about electric cars as opposed to getting people onto bicycles. I mean, actually, one of the things in London, and I think in quite a lot of places, has been that there's been an amazing lot of new bicycle lanes put in during COVID. I mean, it's been a huge shift to people using bicycles. And I hope that that will be one of the sustaining things after the pandemic, that lots of people have got used to riding bicycles, that a lot of the roads have been, you know, reorganized to make space for cycles. I mean, is that a technological solution? I mean, a bicycle is a technology, an electric bike is even better, but it's not some new artificial intelligence technology. It's a very old technology, but being embraced in a new form of city, in a new form of life, I think.
Mm-hmm. And this new form of life, we can understand this new form, this new utopia, let's say, as a two-speed life, let's say, in which we are connected, globally connected, always connected if we
Yeah.
want, but at the same time we live in a concrete environment close to other people, and maybe we have control of the time in some moments. So we can run, but we can also stop, and we are in a place at the same time connected everywhere. So this two speed uh, this two-speed understanding of the city for you is a feasible paradigm. So we walk around, we walk, let's say, more than ever. We ride a bike more than ever, but at the same time we are connected through mobile phones to everybody. So this kind of two speeds, let's say, two extreme speed.
Yeah.
This is feasible for you. Is just it is just for luxurious societies. It's just kind of luxurious ecology. It's only for those that can afford this paradise.
I mean, I guess I think there's more than two speeds actually, that I think people experience kind of very different speeds, and that they're very much culturally infused. I mean, I was listening today to a program on radio, right? It was absolutely classic, about people in a good area of London not wanting a new depot for the delivery of goods, right? They want their goods delivered, but they don't want the depot anywhere near where they live. Yeah, an Amazon depot. And one of the sales pitches of the depot people was that they would be able to deliver food literally in 10 minutes, right? In 10 minutes, you know, and you just think, what, you know, the cultural expectation of speed. I mean, I can remember a couple of years ago when Amazon first said you could get a book in, it was the next day, and then it was in the afternoon, and then it was in 2 hours, you know, that actually the cultural expectations of speed are kind of so crazy. The thing about what, you know, that sort of, you know, that people sort of don't reflect on. I mean, how is the food or the book getting there so quickly, right? What are the conditions of work, you know, and the economic relations, sort of the infrastructure underlying the speed of consumption, you know, which is just kind of completely sort of crazy now, the business of clicking and things just arrive with, you know. And so I think, you know, these speeds are very much dependent on kind of cultural expectations, really, that have been ramped up and up, you know, in terms of consumption. And I think we, you know, that is a cultural issue of how to row back from that somehow, you know, culture of consumption, which links right back to the your climate emergency issue. I mean, I have to say that when the barge, you know, the Suez Canal being blocked recently, you know, and you saw that barge, and you just thought, you know, what is in those containers? Do you know what I mean? What, you know what I mean? Like the kind of amount of stuff, you know, that is being shipped around the world is just completely crazy, you know. So it's about a kind of consumption capitalism, you know, that's kind of so at root of it. And not, you know, there's no easy solution to it, but, you know, I think we do have to sort of think about our expectations of speed, really.
Okay, let's elaborate a little bit more
Yeah,
that, Judy.
yeah,
Because we have seen that, let's say, people taking a bus, they can afford half an hour journey if there are no stops, or one or two stops. If
yeah,
there are 7 stops in between, even though the total time of the journey is the same, people feel very uncomfortable and people don't like. So it's
yeah,
kind of the time you waste, the wasting time, the time you lose, which matters more than the total time. Especially if you can read, if you can talk with other people, you can, you know, so watch the city through the window. I mean, it's not the total time, it's the interruptions. So there is some anthropological reason for this. Also, you remember Cesar Marchetti analyzed the total time people spend traveling. It was like 1 hour per day in average, and and 10% of the revenue. So there is kind of an anthropological explanation of the way we understand traveling, and the time we spend traveling, and the interruptions and the detours of the travel.
I mean, I agree with you, but I guess what I'd say, and why I have a chapter on history in my book, Press for Time, is how much these things have changed historically, you know, so that, you know, going around London, I always think about reading that actually a horse and buggy was as fast actually to get round central London as it is in a car because of the traffic, you know, that actually our sort of historical sense of speed and what is fast and how quickly you can go somewhere, whether it's aeroplanes or cars, has just kind of shifted historically. And I think will sort of shift again. I don't think it's kind of set in stone. And, you know, I love reading kind of those books of, you know, when trains were new and people got on trains and couldn't imagine how fast the train went and how their experience of time was so kind of altered. So, you know, I just think there's a kind of historical specificity to it. And I think it's very hard to judge these technological changes in the moment, I have to say. I kind of always think that the internet and mobile phones, I mean, they're new. You know, if you've got a historical lens at all, I mean, they're actually rather new. So we now think, oh, we can multitask and we can be completely connected. And, you know, I mean, I just wonder if in 20 years these things will seem dramatic, or if we'll have just integrated them like we did the landline, you know, like people, I mean, I studied mobile phones when they were very new, and people said to me, oh, mobile phones are such a dramatic technology. And I remember saying, well, it's just a telephone that you can pick up and move around with. It's not, you know, it's not a, you know, it's not such a kind of brilliant technology kind of in a way, you know. And I mean, we don't even, when I started studying technology actually in the 1980s, I didn't sort of even think a telephone was a technology, because I just thought it was part of the household. You know, I didn't, you know, it's, or a refrigerator or a washing machine, you know, that there are even how we think about technology is so now formed by the kind of the new and exciting, and people only want to talk to me now about artificial intelligence and algorithms, right? That's all people are interested in, right? Not, whereas actually I've got trouble with my oven, I've got trouble with some, you know, I've got my daily technologies that enable my life. But people always focus on the new as if only the new is kind of important.
Yeah.
And the new won't be new soon, you know.
So in this subject, do you think that our intuitions, so the way we generalize our personal experience, make us to make a lot of mistakes? I mean, in your article, Life in the Fast Lane, you state that there is a need to connect somehow, to link social theory with empirical research. So it means that, I mean, do you mean that we too easily we get to conclusions thinking on our personal experience all around, without doing enough empirical research to know what is actually happening?
Well, I do think that. And actually, you know, for example, I remember Bauman, you know, writing about liquid modernity, and a lot of other theorists about cosmopolitanism and, you know, the movement and things like that. And it took years for people to do empirical research and talk about the fact, well, some people were moving, but other people weren't moving. And, you know, I'm sure that's what, you know, Creswell means by, what is his term, the kinetic elite, you know, that some people are moving fast and other people can't. And as we know, there's huge numbers. I mean, millions and millions of kind of migrants and displaced people all over the world who aren't able to move, where there are borders, where, you know, I mean, it's just so differentiated. And so I've become more and more skeptical, I guess, of, you know, what we in sociology talk about as grand narratives, you know, big stories about a new epoch. And I mean, I'm very fond of German writers like Harmut Rosa, who's written very good books on acceleration. But even some of those books kind of generalize about the sort of speed of modernity in far too kind of broad a way, I think. And I'm very sort of concerned, I guess, to do empirical work and look at the differentiated experience within those narratives. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. On Reset for Time, you said something that I would like you to further elaborate, because it's quite important in the context of our research. You said that saving time is a questionable good. So saving time should not be the paramount aim of public policies, in particular in transport, I guess. And then you also said that most important things in life cannot be quantified, measured, or accelerated. So please, could you further elaborate this? Because
Well, I guess I
strong
think
argument.
no. I guess I think that we so much, and this is not recent, you know, this is kind of in terms of, you know, the history of capitalism, that we, and you mentioned kind of Taylorism. I mean, that we've so learnt with clocks and watches over the hundreds of years and with the forms of work to think about time as duration, as an amount, as a thing that can be saved, kind of like money. You can save money, you can save time if you do things faster. And, you know, one of the examples I use in my book is, you know, for example, email is the absolute classic, right? That email comes in and that we think, oh, wow, letters take so long. Letters, you know, to post letters take a long time. And we can now do email and we'll have so much more time because we're able to do them just quickly.
Yeah.
Save time, right? And what happens, which happens in my view all the time with technological change, is that technologies don't simply save time. They actually change the nature of the task. They change the nature of work, right? I mean, actually, there weren't emails before emails were invented. Now we hate emails. We feel like we're buried in emails. We don't know how to get away from the emails, which were introduced actually to save time, right? Because of speed, that they would be instantly, yeah. And so you know, so I don't think there's a simple connection. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, between the application of technology and the saving of time. And I feel that very strongly, that when you look again, you know, there's a lot of debate about the end of work and technologies taking jobs, right? But actually, if you do workplace studies, on the whole, what you find is that, you know, some jobs go, and I'm not saying they don't, but, you know, the technology creates other jobs, the kind of way the work is done moves, new things are created, that it's a complicated story, that it isn't a simple story of time saving. But I guess the other thing I'd say is that we have fallen into this notion of time as duration, rather thinking about, you know, the quality of time. And also, if we're saving time, what are we saving it for? How do we think about what we want to save time for, and what sorts of values can we have to think about that in kind of different ways? And again, I guess I go back to kind of care and taking care of people and taking care of the world and spending time on things like that that aren't easily measurable.
Yeah.
You know? Excuse me.
Let me go back a little bit to the two times you mentioned the kinetic elite, also by Tim Creswell, uh, as well as the concept of mobility justice by Mimi Shepherd.
Yep.
We will have a talk with her as well. And it seems to us that these, I mean, these persons, I mean, Tim and Mimi, they are in a way translating or transferring the concepts, the traditional concept of sociology of social classes or classes to the management, to the time management, in the same way that, similar way, let's say, that post-Marxist sociologists like Lefebvre, Castells did, in talking about neighborhoods and classes related to housing. So,
Yep.
so Osoja, the geographer, that talks about spatial justice, the same way that Mimi talks about mobility justice. What do you think about this new wording, these new concepts emerging?
Well, I like them very much, but I also like the old time-space geography that kind of predates some of that work, which looks at different people's journeys and the time they take. And again, if I can take a feminist perspective on it, yes, that women and mothers have much more complicated journeys. You know, that if you look at the geography of journeys and you look at transport, you know, it's a very old issue, but the issue about actually, if you have to take two children to different schools and get to work, you need different forms of transport and a different kind of layout that if you're, let's say, a male just going straight to work or not, yeah? That actually space is very differentiated by forms of work and by household composition. And I would just always insert that into the discussion, I guess, into those ideas.
You also stated that part of the problem on social theory and empirical research is that the categories, the concepts of speed and acceleration, and it's linked with progress, productivity, and efficiency, don't provide an adequate language to formulate new ideas about how to use the digital infrastructure. This is something we do believe, all of us working on this project, actually. We didn't read this from you, but, but we will quote this. I will appreciate very much if you can further elaborate the need for new wording that helps us to look in the right direction and focus on the more relevant subjects. What new words, what new categories?
I mean, that's a terribly difficult question. I mean, you know, one of the things, you know, one of the words that's become popular kind of recently in technology studies is the word infrastructure, yeah? And one of the things that's come out of COVID seems to me that fast broadband should be now thought of like water or gas or electricity as infrastructure, right? What's the infrastructure you need to live in a digital economy? And, you know, that seems to be quite interesting because, again, in terms of homeschooling, what has come out very clearly, and I have to say, I have to admit that I hadn't realized it, right? That I remember 20 years ago, a big discussion about the digital divide, yeah? Who had access to technology and who didn't. And I kind of thought that we'd sorted that more or less, right? And then it comes out that actually in a lot of poor households, you know, that have got 2-3 children, there's no way that they've got 2-3 computers and that the children can all homeschool, right? That actually there's incredible disadvantages in terms of homeschooling via the internet, and people start talking about, you know, broadband as part of the infrastructure. So, you know, that's one thing I think that kind of should be kept, that, you know, everyone has a right to that, and actually that gives you access to all kinds of education and citizenship rights. So that's sort of one, you know, one thing I'd like to stress. I mean, you know, it's difficult what you're asking me, really. You know, what is the opposite in a way of you know, I mean, I guess I'd say what I've said before, that I think that, you know, a lot of digital technologies and apps, and for example, you know, people going around with with watches that count how many steps they do and their heartbeat, and, you know, that there's a lot of technologies now for self-optimization, for optimizing your time, for living your, you know, doing the most steps most quickly so you'll have a healthy life, and tracking, you know, all of this datafication, if you like, of yourself. You know, we have a lot of concepts in science and technology studies to talk about, you know, what does it mean to have all this data available that you didn't have before about how you live, all this behavioral data, you know, and is this a good thing or not to have access to so much medical data, behavioral data, how you're sleeping, whether you're deep sleeping enough, you know, all of these things. And it seems to me that they're very focused, as I said, on optimizing individual time rather than thinking more collectively and collective solutions about sort of time and the ways we want to live. And so, I mean, care is just a shorthand really for trying to talk about a more collective notion of time, right, than an individualistic one like contemplation, like slowing down, you know. I mean, I remember writing something about the slow food movement at some point. I was very enthusiastic about the slow food movement. And a colleague of mine brought me up fast and said, you know, that is such a bourgeois concept. She said to me, who do you think who do you think goes to restaurants and has slow meals, and who do you think's cooking them? She said, you know, like it's kind of these concepts taken out of context, you know, what do they really kind of mean actually? And it's also a kind of bit of a nostalgic, you know, I guess the other thing, and I'm very influenced by Donna Haraway in this thinking, really a great, American feminist theorist, is this kind of notion that somehow we'll go back to nature, we'll go back to slowness, we'll go back to traditional communities, the sort of romanticization of going backwards, rather than seeing technology as facilitating a new forwards, where, technology will do some things that there's a lot of appeal in speed and quickness, and these things are appealing in lots of ways, but also we need to kind of always be thinking about what do we want the technology for and how do we want to sort of live, really. I'm sorry I haven't got a new concept I could just pull out of
Let me take one question from one of our colleagues, Stephanie. She says that in an article you write about how we predicted, I mean, experts, let's say, predicted.
I'm sorry?
That in an article you wrote that it was a prediction, a well-known prediction, that in the future everybody will have more leisure time.
Yes.
Due to the automatization of tasks. And why do you believe this did not happen actually? And do you think we will reduce our working hours in the future? So is that in a way asking again about the concepts of leisure and work? These are going to be very different activities. They're going to be much closer one to the other. What do you think about?
I mean, again, I think these issues are social issues and not purely technological issues, that we have to really make decisions about what work we want automated, and automate in order to shorten working hours. And I'm a great believer still in the shorter, in a shorter working week. And I was, again, very struck, if I could just go back to the Californian example, of how some of these tech billionaires tell us that we should have a universal basic income, that they can work day and night in their workplaces because they love their work and they're geniuses, and it's fine to work day and night because they have cafes and gyms and everything on the campus. Yeah. And that we should actually have a universal basic income because they will make us unemployed, and then we can fiddle, we can do sort of other things. And all of these issues all raise the business about that actually no one should be working day and night, that this whole business about workplaces that require 24/7 dedication are shocking, that they assume that people don't have children, don't have lives, and that people are young. All these companies hire young people and use them up for 20 years, and then that, so that, I mean, it's about a model of work actually, and the intensity of work. And I think we need to rethink work, in ways that, we know from kind of psychological studies that actually work is very important for people, that it gives people identity, it gives people a rhythm to their lives, that actually it's a good thing to have a few days work. It's a very sort of positive thing, but there's a difference between intense work and kind of work that's got decent conditions and decent pay and gives you some control over your time. So, I think we need to kind of rethink working patterns, share out work, try and get rid of work that's kind of unpleasant. But, I worry about the discussions of things like universal basic income, because I do think it is difficult to not have rhythm, to go back to your issue of rhythm, And if I can just give you one study that I really loved that I read, it was a study of some unemployed people. It was an American study actually, and it was about the fact that the unemployed look forward to the weekend as much as people who work. And the reason for that was because the other people they knew were then free to spend time with, right? That the main thing they wanted was time with other people, yeah? Mm-hmm. And the time with other people was the weekend time. And so whether you're working or you're not working, actually the most precious thing is to be able to coordinate time with other people. And actually, if you work the night shift or, all of these things, you can't organize, social collective time in that way. There's some colleagues of mine in Britain who write about, they call it, that we live in a desynchronized or deroutinized society. And what they mean by that is that our schedules are so different now that when people used to work the same working week, then you knew at the weekend that people would be at the pub, let's say, just to carry or at the cafe, yes? But now people work all kinds of different hours and shop at different hours, and, you know, and so actually the sort of collective spaces where people get together, you know, the timing and scheduling of collective spaces is kind of much more difficult than it used to be. And I think that's very important. That's what I learned from that study of unemployment, that actually what people want is time together. They don't want time, you know, the unemployed have got a lot of time on their own. You know, they have a lot of time and control over their time. What they want is time with other people, you know.
Yeah, well, Judy, this will be a wonderful ending for the talk, but I have another question.
Okay, all right.
Which is about the feminist view of artificial intelligence. But your actual subject of research. I cannot resist to ask you about. I don't know what it means, but I know that I guess that if a feminist view on urban planning is good for everybody, if a feminist view on public transport is good for everybody taking a bus, I guess a feminist view of artificial intelligence is also good for everybody. But what it is?
Yes, I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, just quickly, and I mean, as I was saying to you before, I mean, you know, what we're trying to do in this project is two things. I mean, one thing is to highlight that the people who are engineers, computer programs, machine learning experts, robotics experts, artificial intelligence experts are on the whole young men who are not representative really and don't have the breadth of experience to design technologies for all of us, you know, that they embed their own experience into these technologies. And so I very much am arguing, and I mean, lots of people are arguing it now. It's become a big issue in Silicon Valley, that we need diverse workforces. Yes, that they're very kind of narrow, the people who do this work, and we need to have a diversity of workers. And the reason for this is not only kind of equal opportunities in terms of work, but also how these inequalities affect the design of technologies. And I mean, actually, I'm on Netflix at the moment, there's a film about coding bias. I mean, there's been a lot coming out recently about, for example, how facial recognition is better at recognizing white faces than black faces, how a lot of automated recruiting systems tend to favor men over women for highly paid jobs. You know, there's lots of algorithm. You know, there's a terrific book on by Virginia Eubanks talking about how a lot of welfare now is automated through algorithms and discriminates against the poor. There's a lot of work now in criminology about predictive policing using algorithms and how racially reinforcing it is. So there's all these ways in which, you know, what are presented to us as neutral technologies, right? As these technologies are just supposed to automate things, and they're sold to us as actually getting rid of bias, as being better than humans because we're also prejudiced or biased, but actually they embed previous behaviors, that the machine learns previous behaviors and embeds them into these machines. So, you know, that's the other aspect that we're working on. How do we have fairer algorithms, if you like, that don't discriminate in these kinds of ways?
Okay, great, Judy. I lied before because I will make you another question, the latest one.
All right, okay.
We have 60 seconds to go.
Yeah.
Frank Smith is asking us if you consider the acceleration of our society, so the fastest evolution of technology, irreversible. So we are going to live in a more accelerated. I mean, if we
I don't think the acceleration kind of per se is the issue. What I would very much like is for the amount of money that goes into research and development of military technology, for example, to be redirected towards clean energy and other technologies, right? I mean, which technological innovations are being accelerated and which aren't, is to do with the investment and priorities of particular societies. I mean, America spends more on military technology than on, technologies I would like to see. So I think it's not, it's not acceleration per se, it's the nature of innovation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much your time. Has been
Great. My time, I'm very much, it's a very good use of my time and a very enjoyable, time.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks to you, and thanks to everybody watching us. So we will have a next talk next week with Carl Honore.
Ah, well, that's a very good continuation.
Yes. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.